Hello and welcome to the Big Blue View YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Today we're going to talk about the New York Giants first round pick, Malik Nabers, wide receiver out of LSU, player the Giants took number 6 overall, passing on potential quarterback picks like J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix. And here to help me discuss Neighbors is Max Toscano of SB Nation's LSU blog and the Valley Shook. Max, thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's pretty exciting to see my childhood and local team. I grew up in the Fairfield County area, drafting a player that I think so highly of for my college team. I kind of had that when the Giants drafted Odell Beckham back in the day. But it's cool to see it again.
So you grew up in the area rooting for the Giants then? I didn't know that.
I did. I switched over because there was a lull around the mid 2010s where I wasn't really watching the NFL that much, sort of over toward the end of Beckham's career with the Giants. And then I sort of jumped back into it when Burrow and Chase went to the Bengals. So I kind of followed them. I've always been a little bit more of a college first guy,
Mm-hmm.
but
So
the
you followed the players then to wherever they landed.
Well, I mean, after Burrow won that title, I really I hadn't really been watching the NFL that much, and I got to a point where I just wanted to follow his career, and I sort of initially wanted to just follow him, but I really got kind of sucked into the Bengals. I think it's a great fan base, and I've had a lot of fun. So I think they may have me for a while, but I'll always think pretty fondly of the Giants just because that was that was one of the first teams I rooted for as a kid. It was the Giants, Rangers, and UConn basketball that were my childhood teams, and the Mets as well.
And we've only seen a very little bit of Neighbors at this point. We've seen rookie minicamp. Media has had access to one OTA practice. When I was there on Thursday watching that practice, you see a little bit of the explosion, and we saw one deep catch. But it's really we're all aware that whatever we see, in the spring and even through the summer, it's the tip of the iceberg, and it really doesn't matter until we get to the games. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically was you mentioned Jamar Chase. You've already mentioned Odell Beckham. The Giants drafted Reuben Randall back in the day.
That's right. Yep.
And that's one that I'm sure Jerry Reese wishes he had a do-over on. But you wrote something, and we know, Jamar Chase, Odell Beckham, the caliber of wide receivers that have come out of LSU. You wrote something before the draft on Malik Nabers, and you wrote that in your mind, this is the best wide receiver prospect ever out of LSU. And considering the names that we're talking about, that's massive praise. So can you sort of summarize, why you think that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has a completeness that Jamar Chase didn't necessarily have coming out. Now, Jamar Chase is very young coming out. He had only played 2 years of college, but Neighbors is young as well. He's 20 years old at the draft, and to me, Jamar Chase, what he was and his fastball was sort of, I think, the best pitch necessarily that any LSU receiver has had as far as being that outside physical bully vertical threat. I think that he was obviously one of the best you'll ever see coming out of college at that. But he didn't really play the slot a lot. Obviously, they had Justin Jefferson doing that. But
Not a bad name either.
right, right. But Chase to me was a little bit more of a specialist as far as what he did than Neighbors was coming out, and I think that, uh, to match what Jamar Chase did, you have to not just be elite at everything you do, but you have to be able to do a little bit more, and I think that when you look at Malik Nabers' profile, to me, he is an outside receiver by nature just because he has good enough size and length, but true elite explosiveness, stop and start, burst, the ability to really sell vertical and snap stuff off, and of course the ability to really gash you downfield. Um, he's kind of got an edge to him, I think, that helps him get off the line against press, that helps him make catches through contact. So I think by nature he is an outside receiver. But when you look at him play in the slot and you look at the way his quick twitch is, you look at the way he is able to change direction, has that feel for space, is able to read defender leverage and kind of run that different style of route that a slot receiver is asked to run than an outside bully type like Chase. The way he is able to do that, which again is I don't necessarily think is his nature. I think his nature is as a field stretcher on the outside. The way he is able to have that level of change up with his fastball is something that I think Chase didn't have as much. And I think Chase is good in the slot, but I think Neighbors is elite everywhere you put him with no drop off. And I think that you look at the way people in the NFL talked about him, you look at like sort of the pre-draft anonymous quotes. They were incredibly effusive. I don't necessarily think I'm alone on this. He was not far behind Marvin Harrison Jr. to most people, who is near generational as a receiver prospect, and he only went one pick behind Chase.
Mhm.
So it's at least close. And I think that that completeness and the style to me is I think a little bit more matchup and scheme proof than a guy like Chase, which is why I would give him the slight edge. And I think Neighbors' upside from here is there's so much that he has yet to develop because he's 20 and still kind of raw. So I think that there's a huge ceiling of untapped potential even from here.
So he's still only 20. I don't have his birth date right in front of
I
me.
know he was 20 at the draft, which is the date that really matters.
Hmm.
But he really is young, and he's grown so much just game by game at LSU, that I think he is very far from maxed out.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope that let's just say we certainly hope he hasn't already played his best football.
Right, right. But even as he is now, I think he is very good.
Yes, and the
I
Giants do list him as 20 years old still.
Yeah,
So
that's
yes.
incredible. He's so young
Hmm.
that there's a lot left in the tank, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Let's um compare him to Justin Jefferson as well. I mean, we know what Giants have seen quite a bit of Jefferson over the last couple of
Mm,
years,
yeah.
and we know how good Jefferson is. Just compare his skill set to Jefferson's before we get to that other LSU guy that played for the Giants for a little
Right.
while.
Well, I think that there are some ways in which they're very comparable, and I think a lot of they're the nature of how they play is pretty different. But I think the similarity to me is that Justin Jefferson is an outside guy by nature who is elite in the slot. You look at him in college, and he's in the slot that last year most of the time because they had Jamar Chase, who you need outside, and they had another guy, Terrace Marshall, who was with the Panthers for a while, who was like 6'3", 210. You got to have him on the outside.
Right, he's a
So
bigger guy.
Right,
Hmm.
so you put the one guy you can put in the slot, and that's Jefferson. So he's running a lot of choice routes, he's running a lot of digs, he's, doing that change of direction, feel for space slot stuff, and then you move him to the NFL, and all of a sudden he's outside, and he's great at it because that's kinda his nature. He's longer, he's pretty explosive, and he's not Neighbors fast, but he's got good speed and just great explosiveness in and out of his breaks. So you have this guy who puts out elite slot tape in college and is able to go outside and play at a place that he's even more suited. And that's where I think he's similar to Neighbors, even though their movement skills, the way they win is very different. Neighbors is quick twitch, change of direction, acceleration. Jefferson is, elite route technique, good hands, early in the route, getting off the line, and really explosive in and out of his breaks with those kind of big, exaggerated cuts that really generate a lot of separation. Different styles, but similar versatility and similar great at everything, um, which I think is Jefferson's defining characteristic.
And the other guy, of course, is the guy that the Giants are intimately familiar with, and Giants fans are intimately familiar with, is Odell Beckham. And of course, you know, in the build up to the draft, we read Beckham comparisons with Nabers, and there are always going to be Beckham comparisons since Nabers landed with the Giants. Just on the field, compare and contrast, the styles of those two guys.
Yeah, I mean they both have that similar calling card, which is that speed and that get up and go and that acceleration and quick twitch. I think he's a little bit less of a bendy guy than I think Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham is so flexible, and I think that Neighbors, one of his few drawbacks is that he does play very upright. Now I think that's something that will be developed over time, as well as different route nuances that he hasn't really needed yet because he's just faster and quicker than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Odell Beckham's ability to kind of contort and bend, uh, not just at the catch point, but at different phases of the route is their main difference. But I think the similarities are pretty clear. Like these are two guys that you like to get the ball into their hands in the short area and let them go to work and let them go erase an angle and take it for 35, 40 yards. That's a lot of what they do. And I think that they both have that same speed and explosiveness. Now the difference at LSU was that Beckham was a great returner and that Neighbors had issues with it. Just because the special teams at LSU in the last couple of years have been it was better last year, but they didn't want to get him on return. But I think there are a lot of similarities, and I think that they're going to be used in a lot of similar ways, especially just with the nature of the offense. That is a lot of timing based, a lot of use of the middle of the field, a lot of quick game. So that I think that they're both guys you get the ball to and let them create after the catch. I think that you're going to see a lot of those, those slants that go to the house, similar to, I think we all remember with Odell.
That was the Eli to Odell specialty, was
Yep.
the perfectly timed slant that let Odell make magic. So
Yeah, and I really think that Dable, who is really obviously very creative offensive mind, you're going to see. I think one thing I think you're going to see a lot of is that they're gonna isolate him to that backside and push the majority of the concept to the front side, and if the coverage flows front side, they're going to take that backside one-on-one slant to Neighbors, and I think they're going to try to get him to the house with that.
the
Which
3x1, the 3x1 sets, the
exactly.
3x1 sets with Neighbors solo on the opposite side.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was what they did with Odell so much, and it was so devastating because if you push
Mm-hmm.
that coverage front side, he was just gonna, flip his hips to that backside, get him the ball, and he was gone.
You know, I have to ask you a question. Why isn't Ruben Randall on this list of LSU greats that we've talked about?
Well, Ruben
I
Randall,
just bring that up. I just bring that up to annoy my Giants listeners. I have to be honest, but
Ruben Randall he really was a nice player to LSU, but he was in offenses that were not well developed in the passing game. I think it was during a period of sort of underdevelopment for a lot of LSU receivers, that Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry were able to break out of just by being so good.
mm-hmm.
But like he was really just a pure field stretcher, and I think that if he was going to be successful in the NFL, it was going to be kind of in like a almost like you see Trey Palmer with the Bucks, or like Khalif Raymond wherever he ever ends up. He's done this on teams before, where it's that guy who gives you 25 catches for like 450 yards and a few touchdowns and is doing nothing but catching, the occasional go ball or slot fade. And I think the Giants asked him to be a complete receiver. I just don't think he was ever that kind of player.
Yeah, it's funny, and I don't want to get sidetracked for too long on Randall, but as I got to know Randall's game a little bit, I never understood the pick because, as you said, he ran a very simplistic offense, simplistic route tree at LSU. And the Giants ran a passing offense under Kevin Gilbride at the time where every pass route had 4 options.
Right.
And that's why so many of Eli Manning's passes went left into the arms of defenders while Ruben Randall was running to the right away from the pass.
Yeah, there was if you got him in a role where he would be like what Marquez Valdez-Scantling was when he was in Green Bay, where he's just you're running goes and comebacks, and we're gonna huck you the ball a couple of times when we get zero blitz or we get man coverage, and that's it. That's your role. And I just think they asked him to kind of be an everything guy, and they just couldn't develop that. I just never thought that was his game.
No. Let's get back to talking about Nabers a little bit. If Malik Nabers doesn't become what everybody thinks he's going to become, and we know that happens. The Giants have a right tackle named Evan Neal out of Alabama, who they took 7th overall, and probably 98% of NFL teams and the draft community thought that was a tremendous pick, and Evan Neal was going to be a tremendous player, and it just hasn't worked out. So sometimes what you think is going to work just doesn't. So if Malik Nabers doesn't reach the sort of pinnacle, the sort of heights that are predicted for him, aside from devastating injury, can you think of something that will hold him back?
It's I think there's always the chance that he doesn't hit his upside, but I think I would be very, very, very surprised, barring injury or anything like that, if he were not at least a comfortably above average receiver. I think when you look at the hit rate at receiver versus other positions like tackle, which is so developmental from college to the NFL, I think receiver, we've gotten to a point where we're projecting it so well, and guys with a certain profile just hit. You look at the guys who bust at the top of drafts. It's the guys who people at the time thought were overdrafted, the guys who rely overly on contested catches. It's not the guys like Nabers, Chase, Jalen Waddle, for that matter, guys like that. I mean, they are hitting at crazy rates right now because it's kind of an independent position. And if you can get open and separate, which Nabers can do, and you don't have any glaring red flags in your game that would hold you back, it's hard. He's a dog too. He's a hard worker. He's got a hell of a competitive edge to him when he gets between the sidelines. I don't know. I can't really, I could see him not developing maybe into a highly technical route runner just because we haven't seen it yet. But we've also seen that with guys who just develop that as they go in the league, or guys like Tyreek Hill who never really have to develop it. But I'm pretty confident that he's going to be good. But maybe he never advances as a route runner. Maybe there's instability. Anytime you have a losing team, you could have, and if that doesn't get shaken, you could have a lot of changes in coaching staffs that provide developmental instability. That can always hurt players. But like, even if it doesn't show up at an insane level on the stat sheet early on, because maybe the Giants struggle offensively, it'll show up on tape, I think. And they have a good staff. I really do like the Giants staff. I like Dable. I don't know. It's a long-winded way of saying I can't see it. It could happen. It could happen. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but it could happen.
I think because of the Giants' experience with Odell Beckham, the Giants fan base, maybe the Giants ownership even, is a little bit leery of the quote unquote diva wide receiver. And Nabers has said a couple of things. I think you said there's an edge to Nabers. There's some personality to Nabers. We can see that. He said a couple of things before the draft. He said something about if the Giants were going to draft him, which he kind of thought they were all along. I think if the Giants were going to draft him, they were going to have to do something about their quarterback situation.
Yeah.
And of course, that's an indirect, that's a shot at Daniel Jones, okay, who is still the quarterback.
Right. He's going to catch balls from him, right.
And the other day, he said something about the throwback uniforms, about basically how it was going to be hard to swag out the throwback uniforms. And basically saying he didn't like them. And I know some people took that comment the wrong way. Um, do you have any worries about, as long as Jones is the quarterback of the Giants, his ability to get along with Nabers? Is Nabers the kind of guy who, if he doesn't get the ball a couple times when he's open, you're going to see him be demonstrative about it? So I guess the long-winded question is, do you have any concerns about that sort of diva behavior we saw from Beckham sort of showing up with Nabers?
I don't think it'll necessarily get to the level it got with Beckham at the end of his career. But I won't say that he's not going to have a voice, and he's not going to be that kind of. I don't think he's going to be detrimental. But I do think he's going to be a receiver, right? There's that viral the Denny Carter tweet about all the position tweets where the receiver tweets, "The enemy speaks kindly and holds a knife." Like, he's a receiver. Malik Nabers is a born wide receiver. But I think that if you look across the league, I think you kind of see that with half of the receivers in this league, because the wide receiver is an identity. Like, if you don't demand the ball, and I think if you don't have that kind of attitude where you kind of want the offense to run through you and you want to demand the ball in all situations, it's hard to be an elite receiver. Now it's a double-edged sword, and it causes drama in a lot of cases. This is nothing new. Terrell Owens was like this. And he's one of the best receivers ever. Stephon Diggs is definitely like this. And it's all about how you manage it. Odell Beckham has always been like this. And, he only really started to struggle when he started getting hurt and left New York. And then it just became an injury thing.
I always thought with Odell Beckham, just as an aside with Odell Beckham, I always thought that the Giants kind of walked on eggshells around him too much.
Yeah, I agree.
I loved Tom Coughlin, and I loved what Tom Coughlin always stood for. But I thought that one of the things that showed that Tom Coughlin was maybe near the end of his coaching career was, as the Giants struggled, Tom Coughlin, to me, did not sort of step on Odell Beckham. He did not sort of squash some of the things that were going on with Odell the way I thought Coughlin would have earlier in his coaching career. And I thought that was desperation for Coughlin to try to win some games. But I thought Coughlin at the end maybe did Odell a bit of a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important to a kid's development in the NFL. You got to get people that know how to manage it, because the good thing is Brian Dable has history with these kinds of players. He had Stephon Diggs for his best year in Buffalo early on, and he had that rolling. It's just a part of managing this position. These guys are everywhere. These guys are going to get more and more common as I think athletes get feel more empowered to be personalities, as I think organizations become a little bit more player centric in all sports. I think that there are going to be a lot of guys like this, and I think that organizations that really know how to understand the nature of where they're coming from, whereas that a lot of these guys, at least the healthiest of the quote unquote diva receivers, want the ball because they want to win. And they want the ball because they think that they give their team the best chance to win. And how do you channel that desire to win and recognize that common ground between Daniel Jones, who has a desire to win, and Malik Nabers, who has a desire to win, that are just different? And how do you reconcile these things and drive it toward that goal? And I think that the best coaches in this league know how to do that with almost every type of player, as long as that player is willing to show up, put in the work, and go try to be great. And I think that Nabers has that. And now this, I think he's going to want the ball, but he's never going to not show up and work. And he's never not going to want to win. And I think that as long as you have that kind of buy-in, it can be channeled.
I'm curious. I think in the piece that I recognized earlier in this post, I think you wrote, you were talking about landing spots for Nabers. And I think you wrote that the Giants were one of the ones that was not exciting. And I'm just curious how you feel about how, I think you've talked about it a little bit, but how you feel about him landing in New York.
I wanted him to go to Herbert so badly, because I wanted to see Justin Herbert launching missiles to him for the next 10 years. And I wanted him to go to a team with an established quarterback, and I just didn't really see that in the top. I think that the Giants, the thing about the Giants that is exciting that the other, I think, potential landing spots didn't necessarily have is that they have a great offensive mind. I think in Dable and Kafka, I think those guys are great. You look at what they did 2 years ago with gum and toothpicks, and it was just some of the most sound offensive design and play calling and use of personnel in the entire league. It was Dable won Coach of the Year. I think he deserved it pretty emphatically. So that does excite me. However, I think that there are just limitations in the passing game that come with, first and foremost, I think an offensive line that's in a little bit of flux. Whiffing on the Evan Neal pick hurts here as they try to reshuffle that and figure it out. And I think the quarterback isn't going to elevate the offense around him and overcome that kind of an offensive line. I think he would need, if you're really going to get the most out of him, you're going to need really, really good infrastructure everywhere, not just that one receiver spot. So it's just a work in progress. And I think that, do I think it means Nabers is going to be any worse? No. I just think it's not going to necessarily produce the 1,600 yard, 15 touchdown, I think could have happened with like a Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
But it does change from a Giants perspective. It's a franchise changer because, let's say they do move on from Daniel Jones and end up in a position to pick like a Carson Beck next year, or maybe a Garrett Nussmeier, his old teammate at LSU, if he blows up like I think he's going to. If they pick that kind of player, you have the WR1 already, and that is the most important exterior piece toward the development of quarterback. So I think it's certainly exciting for the Giants, but I think that I just wanted to see him with Herbert, honestly.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that, actually. So we won't hold it against you. So Max, I appreciate the time, appreciate the insight, and we'll be looking forward to some Jones to Malik Nabers slant passes to the house this fall.
It'll be fun. Thank you so much for having me on. I love doing this. I love talking ball. I love talking about the guys I like, and I'll always have a soft spot for the Giants for sure.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.